The election, which will be held on July 9th, is too close to call. On June 30th, Jokowi was polling at 46% of the votes and Mr. Prabowo at 42.6%. Jokowi is an unusual politician. A mediocre orator, his appeal rests on his humble roots as a furniture seller, his can-do pragmatism and a reputation unsullied by corruption. He has no great fortune and, unlike many of those born into political influence, was not educated abroad. With a cupboard free of skeletons, he built a name for effective governance, first as mayor of the mid-sized Javanese city of Solo and then as governor of Jakarta. He was good at the unsexy problems of dredging canals, collecting rubbish and providing healthcare, life-improving things that ordinary people notice. He made a point of walking through neighbourhoods and listening to constituents, a rarity in Indonesia. He is often compared to Barack Obama for the way he energized voters even before he officially launched his campaign. The difference is that Mr. Obama was a near-perfect campaigner. Jokowi has been disappointing. He never grasped that running for president is a different game from running for smaller offices. Promises of good governance are not enough. Someone close to his team says two failings stand out. First, Jokowi has lacked a ruthlessly professional campaign. His handlers have not swatted down the smears that could never be traced back to Mr. Prabowo's people that Jokowi was secretly a Chinese, a Christian or a communist, or that he was the puppet of Megawati Sukarnoputri, a former president and the head of the party on whose ticket Jokowi is running. Second, in a country as large, diverse and complex as Indonesia, Jokowi needed to tell a broader story. Here is what is wrong with Indonesia, and here is how I intend to fix it. Jokowi never developed these storytelling skills. Yet the campaign is not merely about one candidate's missed chances. It is also about how Mr. Prabowo seized the initiative. While Jokowi started campaigning only in March, Mr. Prabowo has in effect been doing so for a decade, having sought the presidency twice before. Both his ex-wife, Siti Hediati Haryadi, daughter of the late dictator Suharto, and his fabulously wealthy brother, Hashim Jojo Hadikusumo, have campaigned on his behalf. He also has the backing of two television tycoons, Abu Rizal Bakri, who heads the Golkar party, and Hari Tanoso Dibio. Between them, they have 5 of Indonesia's 12 terrestrial television networks. Douglas Ramage of Bauer Group Asia, a business consultancy, credits Mr. Prabowo with giving Indonesians a message they want to hear, an assertive, muscular Indonesia that has lost control of its natural resources and had too much of its wealth taken by foreigners. Mr. Prabowo's nationalist fulminations sound rather paranoid, and it is not clear that he believes them, but they seem to be working. There is a darker side, however. Mr. Prabowo has long been dogged by talk of human rights abuses. For instance, that in the late 1990s, as an army general, he ordered the abduction and torture of pro-democracy activists and helped stir up anti-Chinese riots in which many died. When Jokowi's running mate Yusuf Kalla raised the allegations during a debate, Mr. Prabowo deflected them by saying he was simply a former soldier who did his duty. Military bluffness is part of his political persona. Mr. Prabowo has also expressed reservations about democracy. He has repeatedly expressed a desire for Indonesia to return to its original constitution, which placed great power in the hands of the president and provided for the holder of that office to be elected by the legislature rather than by popular vote. On June 28th, he called direct elections not appropriate for us and said that much of our current political and economic systems go against our nation's fundamental philosophy, laws and traditions. They do not suit our culture. Though Mr. Prabowo later backtracked, many worry that he would see victory as a mandate to roll back direct elections. He could do considerable political damage just by trying. Marcus Meitzner, a specialist in Indonesian politics at Australian National University, believes that Mr Prabowo's anti-democratic statements have turned Jokowi, the apparent agent of change, into the candidate of the status quo. Under his presidency, democracy with all of its flaws and deficiencies would continue. As for their economic policies, both candidates have espoused protectionism. Jokowi's appears milder. Foreign investors certainly prefer him. Deutsche Bank reports that if Mr Prabowo wins, 56% of investors surveyed would sell their Indonesian assets and just 13% would buy, while a Jokowi win would cause 74% to buy and just 6% to sell. In truth, their platforms are not radically different. Both want more roads and power. Both want to keep in place a ban on exports of unprocessed mineral ore, and both say they worry about rising inequality and environmental degradation. Both too will have to manage fractious parliamentary coalitions. The two differ markedly, however, in both their personalities and their pasts. On July 9th, Indonesians will decide how much that matters. Asia. Indian politics. Waiting for the Modi mojo. In its first budget, the government must fix public finances and offer reforms.
What a difference the prospect of a new government has made. The Indian stock market is up by a fifth this year, a shaky rupee has steadied, and consumers are upbeat, buying more cars, for instance. But on July 10th, Narendra Modi's finance minister, Arun Jaitley, must dish up sensible plans in his first budget. Mr Jaitley insists that fiscal prudence trumps mindless spending and populism. Yet the target he inherited of shrinking the budget deficit to 4.1% of GDP this year already looks all but impossible. 2 months into the fiscal year, spending outstrips revenues by more than $40 billion, nearly half the planned annual total. More bills loom. A new law giving cheap food to 2/3 of India's 1.25 billion people rolls out soon. Other demands press in. If the current weak monsoon does not strengthen, millions of farmers might need help. Rising global oil prices are pushing up energy bills and with them subsidy costs. Then come Mr Modi's infrastructure ambitions. He promised millions of jobs as roads, factories, power lines, high-speed trains and 100 new cities are built. Finding the money for all that is becoming a priority. And if that were not enough, Mr Jaitley and Mr Modi, the Prime Minister, who appear to work closely together, have the even bigger task of identifying which broad, liberalising reforms they believe will bring India rapid and sustained economic growth. Mr Jaitley's budget is expected to cut wasteful fuel and other subsidies. When they are not stolen, these mostly go to the better off, especially the more prosperous farmers. Better and cheaper is to switch to cash welfare programs. Money saved could then be spent on financing healthcare. The new government has gone along with a long-planned increase in diesel prices, but it has partially backed down, following popular protests, on a decision made by the outgoing government to raise subsidised railway fares. That is worrying, especially since Mr Modi spoke days before of the need not to back away from hard economic decisions. But the benefit of the doubt remains with Mr Modi and Mr Jaitley. Cutting public money for all sorts of goods, fertiliser, cooking gas, paraffin, electricity for farmers, is in theory becoming easier. Some 640 million Indians are enrolled in a biometric identity scheme called Aadhaar. When cutting subsidies, it should now be easier to identify those who need cash transfers to cushion the blow. Aadhaar and linked bank accounts could be extended to many more, yet rumours suggest the administration may scrap it. It was started by the Congress Party, now in opposition. A second broad reform could be what Mr Modi calls cooperative federalism, state governments getting to decide more on spending and policy. Go-getting states could experiment, for example, in reshaping a national job creation scheme involving rural public works. And some states that have agreed to let in foreign supermarkets, such as Tesco or Walmart, could push on with it despite opposition from reactionary bits of the ruling and nationalist Bharatiya Janata Party, the BJP. Then internal barriers to trade need to go, removing state checkpoints on roads as well as crazy restrictions on who may sell farm goods over state lines. And Mr. Jaitley needs to fix a date for rolling out a long-delayed national goods and services tax. That would help plug the budget deficit. Lastly, the budget should encourage more private capital to chase productive work. At the moment, the government's borrowing is crowding out private investment. Mr. Jaitley is expected to start selling state-owned firms. He should be bold. Putting Air India on the block would send a powerful message that India is open for business. In several industries, the addition of foreign investment and expertise would be especially useful. Mr. Jaitley is expected to face down strong lobbies among the protectionist parts of the BJP. In the defence sector, poor-quality local producers squeal about competition. They want foreign ownership of ventures limited to minority holdings. Mr. Modi campaigned on promises of a powerful domestic defence industry helped by outsiders. It is not yet clear exactly what the Finance Minister intends to unveil on July 10th, but Mr. Jaitley's propositions will reveal much about the ambitions of Mr. Modi and his allies.
Asia. Taiwan and China. Say cheese! The first island visit from a Chinese minister since 1949. Since the People's Republic of China was founded in 1949, no ministerial-level communist official has set foot in Taiwan. That changed on June 25th when Zhang Zhizhen, head of China's Taiwan Affairs Office, accepted an invitation from his counterpart, Wang Yuqi, and visited in hopes that the democratic island nation might one day be wooed into the Chinese fold. Perhaps the visit was bound to take place sooner or later. China has long claimed Taiwan as its own. Taiwan's president since 2008, Ma Ying-jeou, has long tried to ease mutual hostilities. He has signed business agreements with the mainland that have led to a surge in cross-strait trade, investment and travel. Yet many Taiwanese worry that economic integration will undermine their lively democracy. Earlier this year, students occupied Taiwan's parliament in a protest against yet another agreement, this one intended to boost trade in services with China. The pact has stalled. So perhaps most surprising was another meeting of Mr. Zhang's with the mayor of the southern city of Kaohsiung, Chen Chu. She is a prominent member of the opposition, the Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP, and a passionate supporter of Taiwanese independence. In the past, China has lambasted the DPP, yet Mr. Zhang, who has a reputation as a poker-faced diplomat, was all twinkle-eyed geniality. At times, with Ms. Chen, he even broke out of Mandarin and into the native Taiwanese. Later, he claimed that China respected Taiwanese people's choices, including presumably their politics. He invited Taiwanese of all political persuasions to participate in the development of cross-strait relations. That too was rare. With Mr. Ma a lame duck, China may be preparing to hold its nose and deal with a DPP government after elections in 2016. Ms. Chen's welcome of Mr. Zhang in Kaohsiung, heartland of the independence movement, also suggests a new pragmatism on the part of the DPP. It needs to persuade voters that it can manage relations with China. Though dogged by rowdy protesters, Mr. Zhang kept up cheerful appearances. It all stands in contrast to China's rows with other Asian nations over maritime claims, as well as its denouncing of protesters in Hong Kong, calling for more democracy.
Asia.
Japan's security. Clear and present dangers. The Prime Minister moves Japan a step away from its post-war pacifism.
It took a war of attrition for Shinzo Abe, the Prime Minister, to win agreement to end a long-standing ban on Japanese troops coming to the aid of allies. But in the end, after months of wrangling, he managed to win the consent of his coalition partner, New Komeito, which had strongly opposed the change. On July 1st, the Cabinet approved a reinterpretation of the Constitution, marking a milestone in Japan's post-war security policy. Article 9 of the 67-year-old document stipulates that Japan forever renounces war as a sovereign right. But Mr. Abe's change means that Japan's self-defense forces, the SDF, will for the first time be permitted to participate in collective self-defense if certain conditions are met. Once the necessary legislative amendments are passed, Japan will be able to come to the aid of an ally, such as America or Australia, but only if Japan itself is under threat. This week, Mr. Abe promised that American-led combat missions in far-flung places remained off-limits. Mr. Abe had wished to rewrite Article 9 altogether, but that was quickly ruled out. Changing the Constitution requires a two-thirds majority in both houses of Parliament, which his government does not have. A popular referendum is also required, and many Japanese treasure their pacifist principles. Nonetheless, the changes promise to be far-reaching. Mr. Abe argued that Japan's defense arrangements are out of date as North Korea develops a nuclear-tipped missile capability and China's military strength grows, challenging Japanese control of the Senkaku Islands, which China claims as the Diaoyus. The United States, Japan's partner in fending off such threats, this week warmly welcomed the reinterpretation. The two countries are preparing to revamp their joint defense guidelines for the first time in 17 years. The reinterpretation was not quite as radical as some Americans had hoped for, says James Schoaf, a former Pentagon official, but it will pave the way for the two armed forces to plan, train and operate more seamlessly. Though they have never fired a shot in anger, the SDF are among the world's most sophisticated armed forces. They will now have clear permission to shoot down a North Korean missile heading for America or to aid an American ship under attack in waters near Japan. They will also have the freedom to offer Americans logistical support, including ammunition, if Japan comes under threat. Separately, the SDF will be allowed to use weapons in UN-approved peace operations. The humiliation of Australian troops having to protect Japanese peacekeepers in Iraq still rankles. The main concession that New Komeito won was that the SDF will still be barred from supplying soldiers engaged in actual combat. The change also opens the way for Japan to take forceful action in the event of China landing personnel on the Senkaku Islands. At the moment, it is unclear whether the SDF, rather than the Coast Guard, may repel such a grey zone incursion. It is not only China which has protested at Mr. Abe's changes. Despite the continued restrictions, for many Japanese, the Cabinet's decision is deeply troubling. In recent months, public opinion has turned further against notions of collective self-defense. Many see in all this the possible rebirth of Japanese militarism. Certainly, opponents resent the lack of public consultation on the matter. 2 days before the Cabinet's announcement, a man set himself on fire in front of Tokyo's Shinjuku train station in protest. He survived, badly burnt. On July 1st, thousands crowded outside the Prime Minister's residence shouting anti-war slogans. New Komeito faces a backlash from its pacifist supporters. It is against this backdrop that the government must now push through over 10 amendments to existing laws in order to implement the Cabinet's decision. It could take years. Mr. Abe's staff are optimistic that Japan will move towards a fuller exercise of the right to collective self-defense. But what they at first saw as a modest step will continue to be a hard slog. Correction. Last week, we incorrectly identified Japan's Labour Minister, article The Battle for Japan. He is Morihisa Tamoda. We are very sorry.
Asia.
Teaching history. Textbook cases. Chapter 10. In which democracies join in East Asia's history wars. In East Asia, history textbooks are barometers of nationalism, and arguments over them are proxies for disputes between states. So it is hardly surprising, at a time when territorial disagreements are breaking out all round the South China Sea and East China Sea, that the region is seeing a new chapter in a long-running argument over how history is taught. This time, though, the bickering has spread beyond Japan and China, its usual homes. And in addition to their international implications, the textbook disputes have taken on a strong domestic character. The new round begins in Japan, inevitably, since Japan's imperial aggression leading to its defeat in 1945 has long provided the starting point for disputes. In its manifesto for the election of December 2012, the Liberal Democratic Party promised to restore patriotic values to education and called current textbooks ideologically prejudiced expressions based on self-torturing views of history. Many academics and teachers were disturbed. On winning by a landslide, the Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe, set up a panel to rewrite textbooks to make clear where there is lack of agreement on historical interpretation, a backdoor way of limiting references to Japanese aggression, says Daniel Snyder at Stanford University, who studies Asia's textbook battles. The panel also says it wants to get rid of Japan's neighbouring country clause, a sort of self-denying ordinance which instructs historians to take into account the sentiments of neighbours, meaning China and South Korea, when writing textbooks. To increase political control over education, the government wants to put mayors in charge of local school districts, and it has ordered one district to switch to a textbook that the government prefers. Such actions fulfill a long-held ambition. Mr. Abe belongs to a parliamentary group that has worked for years to limit historical references to Japanese wartime atrocities. Neighbouring countries reacted with predictable outrage. When Japan proposed teaching that the